I was hesitant to talk about Expedition 33 because it seems like most people are head over heels in love with the game, and I didn't want to be the sole dissenting voice. I didn't even record any footage until I reached the end of the game, because seriously, I wasn't planning on talking about this. I don't want to be that guy that hates everything popular because it's not true. But I think it's worth offering a different perspective on this, so here we are. Expedition 33 is a respectable effort that succeeds in showing the wider audience that the turn-based genre is still worthwhile. There's plenty of passion that went into making this game, and that sense of passion was evident from start to finish. If you're at all a fan of turn-based RPGs and you haven't played this game, I still think it's worth playing even though I'm about to rattle off a laundry list of complaints. If you care about spoilers, don't watch this video because I'm going to spoil the ever-loving shit out of it. So here's your chance to hit the ejector seat button if you care. At launch, this game was being showered with praise from pretty much everyone, especially people that haven't beaten the game. And if all I played were 10 hours, I'd go online and sing hallelujah, the French made something great for once. But with RPGs, the 10-hour mark is when they start to dip in quality. I don't think giving first impressions does anyone any favors, because people will interpret those impressions as a review or judgment on the entire game's quality. What we have here is another Baldur's Gate 3 situation, where a studio pushed out a competent, finished game in an era where most games are either unfinished, uninspired, or flat out a waste of time. And because the industry is experiencing a dry spell of creativity, that means games like Expedition 33 receive unanimous praise, because people forgot what it feels like to play something new that isn't terrible. Emphasis on new. It's precisely because Expedition 33 is new, not a sequel or remake or spiritual successor, that people were surprisingly pleased with it. And as an art exhibition, it's fantastic. It's so refreshing to play an RPG that doesn't go through the motions with a lava area, a desert area, a forest area. Expedition 33 has inspired, stunning vistas from the moment you press start. It's got a vast, beautiful soundtrack, even if I can't remember most of the songs because there's so many. It doesn't go through the motions, and that's why I said that sense of passion is made clear throughout its runtime. But, and this is a big, tremendous but, Expedition 33 is a mediocre game. For all the praise I can sing about its environmental art, the exceptional voice work, the return of the traditional RPG overworld, when it comes down to what matters most, gameplay and story, that's where Expedition 33 falters. Before you jump down my throat and interpret my following complaints as a statement of objective fact, I might as well add a disclaimer. Just pretend that the title of this video says, "In my opinion, Expedition 33 is mediocre." None of this is a personal attack on people that enjoy the game. This is just my experience. I shouldn't have to say this, but experience has shown that people need this reminder for some reason. Let's start with the level design. Even if the devs didn't outright admit that this game was inspired by the early Final Fantasies and Dragon Quest, you'd know almost immediately. The overworld tricks you at the start with this dense assortment of stages, and relative to the scale of the map, you get the illusion that you're going to be in for another 100-hour-long endurance match. Once you unlock the ability to swim, you can explore most of the map, and you'll come to realize that past this starting island, the dungeons are spread out. This is traditional JRPG world design. Start on foot for a few hours, get a boat, and unlock more of the map. Then you get an airship and explore the whole thing. The reason why overworlds worked in the earlier Final Fantasies was because random battles existed. Moving from town to town on foot in the early game meant getting into conflict along the way, so there was an excuse for the distance between towns and dungeons to be lengthy. But in Expedition 33, you've got the huge overworld and no random battles. You can go out of your way to fight a handful of mobs, and there are some overworld bosses that drop interesting gear, but most of your time is spent uneventfully hoofing it from place to place. Maybe go a bit out of your way to nab an upgrade stone or some money, but that's about it. Also, maybe I missed it, but you can't fast travel on the overworld, only in the levels, and SKA doesn't fly fast enough to cover all of this ground in a reasonable amount of time, so there's a lot of wasted time flying between levels once you hit the final act. I don't have a big problem with the overworld, these are minor nitpicks, and overall, I'm happy with its inclusion. But the issues I have with it translate to the levels themselves. These stages are vast, and so much of your time is spent running around without conflict. I guess you're supposed to admire the scenery, and I'll say this much. There's zero forced walking here, and I seriously can't believe that. Still cum stains on the ledges, but you can't win every battle. But so many stages are rife with sections where you run around without any combat. You have to choose when to fight. None of the enemies are a threat. They chase you, sure, but they're atrociously slow. You can always outrun them with ease, and you're never put in situations where you're boxed in a room with enemies, forcing you to kill them to escape. So if you're ever at critical health and out of healing flasks, and you want to retreat to a checkpoint flag, there's never any danger. Exploring isn't very exciting or suspenseful because enemies are mostly motionless, they don't ambush you, and they're not a threat when they are chasing you. If you attack them, you get a guaranteed first strike. With a game like Romancing Saga 2, you only get the preemptive if you attack an enemy from behind, and they're sensitive to running, so you've got to sneak. None of that is relevant in Expedition 33. Attacking them from any angle gives you first strike, which means literally every single non-boss mob in the game starts with an advantage. Also, there's no minimap. There's an overworld map, but none for the dungeons. I'm guessing this is to encourage exploration and to make discoveries feel more rewarding. Problem there is that exploration is rarely rewarding. 9 times out of 10, any shinies you see are going to be weapon upgrade stones, lumina tints, or currency. You will get these so frequently and will acquire such vast quantities that they cease to feel like meaningful rewards after the first 10 hours. If I see a shiny on a ledge and don't know how to reach it, the absence of the minimap means you need to rely on your senses to obtain that item. That would feel rewarding if these items felt like meaningful rewards. When I go out of my way, running through large empty hallways to finally reach that item, and it's my 200th Lumina tint, I don't feel any sense of accomplishment. Sometimes, you'll run into a fork in the road, and it's like, pick a path, guess wrong, and you took a lengthy, uneventful detour to grab some chintzy item. Guess right, and by the time you realize that this is the proper path, and you wonder where the other path led, you don't feel like wasting your time backtracking just to grab a pittance of currency. I'd rather there exist a minimap, so I can cut back on all this wasteful fumbling around. And it is fumbling around. There's a jump button, but jumping is very clunky. You gain little height, and it's not obvious what you can and can't jump on. There are invisible walls everywhere, but you can't tell where you can go until you hit these invisible walls because there's no minimap to guide you. You can jump on some rocks, but not others. Grab some ledges, but not others. If you want to include precise platforming, don't have my character roll when he lands. Some stages have pits you can fall into, but most don't. It's never clear. Because exploration is so grounded and restrictive, I'm left wondering why there's even a jump button to begin with. Platforming has no bite to it, even in the optional stages. I'd much rather have dense stages, a quarter the size of the ones we're given, than spend so much of the playtime running around. This game does not have the movement system, battle system, nor the loot table to support these maps. Moving on to combat. For a while, I thought the battle system was the highlight of the experience, and when I stepped back and gave the combat a second look, a good hard look, I realized that it's the real-time elements that stopped me from loving this game. And it's not because the real-time aspect is challenging. I enjoyed the challenge, and pulling off parries is extremely satisfying because you get this crunchy sound effect and exaggerated slow-mo. It's because these defensive options define the flow of combat, which means other aspects of gameplay, character customization, and even the difficulty mode are marginalized. It's hard to understand this with a one-sentence summary, so let me explain with an example. This is Lune's skill tree. Because it branches in a non-linear way, that means you have a choice in how to develop her skill loadout. I can specialize in fire skills, and the burn stacks will synergize with other characters and their skills. That's pretty cool, right? It is pretty cool. That freedom to customize a loadout is why I didn't think there was an issue with the combat for the first 10 hours. But take a look at this section with healing skills. Because your defensive options during battle are so powerful you can potentially no-hit the entire game if you're good enough, you might feel tempted to ignore the healing skills for each character in favor of damage-dealing ones. And guess what? That is absolutely the right call to make. Healing skills in this game are pointless. I beat the game without using them once, and that's not a brag. The The game just isn't designed around healing off damage, it's designed around preventing it. Think about it, the damage you take in this game, even on normal mode, is kept high to force you to engage with the dodge and parry system. That's good. If you could just tank every hit, what would be the point of the real-time aspect? But if you've got a character at low health, is it worth wasting your action points to heal when you can just maintain aggression and dodge the attacks? In an RPG like Chrono Trigger, you can't dodge attacks, so you have no choice but to heal the damage if you want to survive. If you play on Expert mode, you are forced to dodge or parry. Missing a single attack can be enough to kill you from full health. Missing a combo is guaranteed death. You don't have a reason to ever heal, because if you survive a missed dodge, you're going to be at such low health that partially restoring it isn't going to help you one bit when you miss the next dodge. You need to learn the patterns to win, and once you learn them, you take no damage. To compensate, attack patterns need to be tough enough so you can't parry everything on your first try, and the game pushes this to the extreme. By the time you reach the endgame, enemies hold their attacks for so long, they make FromSoft sweat in anticipation. When they combo, the follow-up can sometimes come out so fast that you can't just parry on reaction. You need to get hit and learn the pattern. The dodge compensates with a longer invulnerability window, but it's not so long that it trivializes the game. If someone out there has the reflexes to parry these combos on their first try, I don't know what you're doing playing games. You should be studied in a lab. And this challenge makes for some engaging boss fights, which are the highlight of the game. But no matter how hard the game gets, I would rather die repeatedly to learn the patterns than spec into healing and brute force the fights. The parrying and dodging are the selling point of this game. Why ignore it? So these healing skills feel irrelevant. Even your basic attack option is irrelevant except for Verso's, because he gets a weapon that gives him a second turn after a basic attack. This game doesn't have a mana system for casting skills, it relies on AP, which is accumulated from attacking, parrying, and in other various ways depending on your build. Once you hit the halfway point, you start each battle with enough AP to kill most regular mobs in one turn, which is good. Normal battles shouldn't take too long, otherwise you'll end up with a Radiant Historia situation where you're spending minutes on dinky trash mobs. But because there's no persistent mana system, and AP is replenished at the start of each battle, there's no resource consideration. You can and should spam your strongest attacks in every single fight to clean them up ASAP. In the early game, using regular attacks to sustain AP works well, but once your builds come online, you can pretty much focus on just the skills, and the better you are at parrying, the less relevant normal attacks and AP generation abilities become. Build variety doesn't carry much weight when you can just parry everything and kill with a resulting counterattack. Once you get good enough at parrying, there really isn't a point in replaying this game if you care about character customization, because any ability, skill, or stat that's defensively aligned isn't worthwhile, and the defining characteristic of an RPG's gameplay is its character customization. Since this game takes inspiration from Sekiro, let's use that for a comparison. How many people replay Sekiro when compared to Dark Souls? The combat may be satisfying, but there's not much flexibility in build variety. It's parry or die. Taking that philosophy and injecting it in an RPG imparts that same side effect. Each playthrough will wind up the same. So let's talk about this for a bit. When you level up, you can allocate 3 points between 5 stats. On a purely point-by-point basis, your allotment doesn't matter much until the third act, and I'll address that in a bit. You get a resource that refunds your stat points, which means you can carelessly distribute points and you won't be punished. But more importantly, the stat gains you get from this screen are so minuscule when compared to pictos and weapons that they feel more like nifty stat bonuses than a development into a proper build. I could stash all my points into luck and get a decent crit boost, or I could equip a single picto that completely smokes my stat allocation. I could focus on vitality and try to get better survivability, or I could just equip a picto that gives me thousands of HP. But the biggest head scratcher is might. Your weapon confers such a gargantuan attack bonus that it outpaces anything you put into might. Weapons also scale with every single stat except for might. Might just offers a flat damage increase, If I can put points into agility or luck and also get an attack bonus, why wouldn't I just do that? This is a stripped down version of the Dark Souls leveling system, but unlike Dark Souls, your weapon choices aren't restricted by your stats. In Dark Souls, 1 point in dexterity can be the difference between equipping a weapon or using something considerably worse. In Expedition 33, 1 point in might is meaningless. 10 points are meaningless. In the third act, you can finally upgrade your weapons to level 20. Once you do so, the stats they scale with reach A scaling. Throughout the entire game up until this point, B scaling and below conferred minor bonuses, but once you reach A scaling, the multiplier explodes and your damage output doubles. Weapon levels 1 through 19 follow a smooth curve, then at 20 plus it jettisons into the stratosphere. The damage increase is so substantial that it's the difference between getting your ass kicked in these optional dungeons and wiping the floor with every single enemy. With Luminas, you're given much more interesting options to develop builds. These are passives that buff you for playing solo, doubling the applied burn stacks, weakening marked targets, and more, so there's plenty of room for theory crafting. Most of the enjoyment I had with this game came from mixing these passives to create combos. You can apply auto shell, then gain powerful once shell's applied, then boost the duration of powerful to 3 turns, all automatically at the start of each fight, and you get to see this satisfying list of activated passives. But there's some insane bloat. The list becomes almost unwieldy by the endgame. Anything involving healing feels useless for reasons I already covered. There's also extremely situational ones you'll never use, like charm immunity, burn immunity, gain AP on a jump counter attack, shell has 10% better damage reduction. You can sort the list, but you can't save loadouts. It would have been handy to save pre-configured builds for each character, so I can quickly swap between them. I would have liked to see less blatantly overpowered Luminas like +1 AP on turn start, or take 2 actions every turn, so you can have room for more creative builds. But really, your build doesn't matter all that much for most of the game because there's a damage cap, and you'll hit it for the first time in around 10 hours. You can't break the cap until the final act, and once you do, the challenge evaporates with some simple grinding, because now you hit for millions of points of damage and can one-shot bosses. I didn't even grind, I just did the side quests for my party members, and from completing their dungeons, I was powerful enough to drop a nuclear bomb on the final boss. This is a significant issue. It seems like the devs were aware that it takes no effort to break this game, so they capped your damage, that way bosses could retain some semblance of challenge. It's easier to balance the game when you know the limits of what the player is capable of, but when I'm hitting the damage cap so early on, and I keep hitting it for another dozen hours, it's hard to care about any of these upgrade systems. Progression feels meaningful in Act 1, but the meat of the experience, that entire middle arc, is missing that sensation of growing stronger. I spent hours without distributing stats, upgrading weapons, or learning skills. There was no urgency to upgrade my team. What does any of that matter when Pictos do all the heavy lifting, and I'm already hitting the damage cap? Then in the post-game, character growth goes from 0 to 100 in a few hours. Talk about anticlimactic when I'm doing a late game side quest, scaling this enormous tower, then the boss at the top is killed in 2 attacks and a counter. With skills, you're limited to just 6 at a time, so unlocking every skill on the tree feels like a wasteful endeavor, especially anything that restores health or confers buffs. You've already built into your favorite skills by the time you've hit level 50, so why even bother gaining skill points and unlocking new skills for the next 50 levels? I'm not even using all 6 of my skills anyway. I'm using the same 2 or 3 that play into each character's gimmick, and the rest are situational. Once you create a build that generates AP like it's nothing, or you get good at parrying, what use is there in equipping any skill that deals low or medium damage? For Lune, once her crit rate gets high enough, she can alternate between a skill that generates 4 stains and a skill that consumes those stains for a multi-hit attack that deals extreme damage. That's all you need. Everything else is situational. For Verso, he generates almost max AP every turn for free, so he can literally spam his most expensive skills over and over. For Mael, she becomes insanely busted in Act 3. It's truly a sight to behold. Equip the weapon that lets you start in Virtuose stance, not virtuous, virtuose, and smack with Stendhal. on turn 1. Congratulations, you broke the game without even trying. Rinse and repeat the same strategy for every fight. Gimmicks steer the character so strongly that it leaves little room for experimentation. Not only is every battle a preemptive strike, you're drowning in so much AP that you're spamming the strongest skills and fighting every battle the exact same way, ending most casual encounters in a single turn on standard mode, the so-called intended difficulty. On expert mode, the first 2 acts are still challenging, but then Act 3 becomes just as broken. If you deny the enemies the chance to attack, then you're not engaging with the real-time aspect of combat, and without that, Expedition 33's battle system isn't better than your average turn-based RPG. It's really only during the boss fights where you can appreciate this battle system, and even then, Expedition 33 isn't as innovative as people claim it is. Super Mario RPG, Paper Mario, The Legend of Dragoon, Lost Odyssey, and the Shadow Hearts trilogy are all turn-based RPGs that incorporated quick-time elements in their combat systems, either offensively or defensively, and they're all over 2 decades old, except for Lost Odyssey, which is already 18 years old if you can believe it. Expedition 33 doesn't copy these mechanics exactly, but it still feels familiar enough to not blow me away. Anyone that believes Expedition 33's real-time aspect breathes new life into the genre, or anyone that says something silly like turn-based games are back because of the combat system, I have to wonder if you ever really cared about this genre. People that love turn-based RPGs know about these older games and have played them. They weren't waiting for something like Expedition 33 to come along and sweep them off their feet. The only people impressed by this battle system are players that have a myopic view of the genre and think everything plays like Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy. So really, it was the story that kept me chugging along. The game dangled enough mysteries to keep me hooked from pretty much the get-go, and most importantly, there's never a point where the story became boring. The premise is interesting, and in a refreshing change of pace, the dialogue is both well written and well acted.
I treat you as if the shadow from the worst day of our lives is going to suffocate you and take you from us too!
That's really the giveaway that this game wasn't made in Japan. The fact that character interactions feel believable. I can tell them apart by their personalities, rather than their hairstyles. But what borderline ruined this game for me was the Act 3 twist. There is no quicker way known to man. It's faster than the speed of light. You can't comprehend how quickly my interest plummets to zero than pulling the "it was all a dream" twist in your story. I don't usually like talking about video game stories because most aren't worth the breath, but Expedition 33 really grabbed me, mostly because of the great voice work. So when the game kills off the entire population of the world, fades to black, and then tells me the entire experience was a world created inside of a painting, I gave up on anything else the game had to say after the fact. Nothing mattered. As it turns out, death is meaningless in this world. People with magical painting powers can enter paintings from the real world and create life as long as there's enough magic in the air. And they can kill off these creations whenever they want. So when Lune and Ciel are killed off, and Mael just paints them back to life, and they get upset for all of 2 seconds before continuing on like nothing happened? Meaningless. I didn't care at that point. The game didn't care either.
I thought you'd be more upset.
I was. I got over it.
We spent an entire game getting to know these characters, and they're brushed aside to focus on family drama. You see, Expedition 33 isn't about some mysterious being that's slowly erasing humanity. It's about parents in a grudge match fighting a proxy war inside of a painting. All of the inhabitants are just fabrications. They're tools in this war. And while that in itself is an interesting premise, the stakes are much lower than what was initially presented. All this loss you encounter, the failed expeditions, this overwhelming sense of doom, these characters are supposed to be on a ticking clock. It's reframed when you realize that this is all essentially fake. There's no permanency, there are no consequences. Once this war is over, either everyone in the painting dies, or everyone is revived, and in both cases, the only characters that still matter are the real ones. I'll concede that the game poses an interesting dilemma. What does God think of his creations? Is the world he created and the life he breathed into it real? What if you and me, right now, in reality, or just players in someone else's game? Does that make us fake? Are our experiences and emotions fake? Of course not. So if you look at the game through this lens, maybe you could still care about the fate of the world. I don't, but maybe you could. You spend so much time in personal conversations getting to know these characters. You can even do side quests to learn more about them. By the way, the timing of these side quests is awful because they don't unlock until the final act. And at that point, why even bother seeking closure for the characters born into this doomed world? What's the point? The scene where Gustav is killed is painted in an entirely different light knowing this twist. Why should I care about him at all if, when this war is over, he can either be brought back because Mael is a god while in this painting, or everyone else will die just the same? If you replay this game, how can you care about Gustav's death, of which the game makes an enormous deal of, when it's ultimately inconsequential? He never mattered. In fact, in the last conversation with Mael, Verso flat out admits that Gustav's death was necessary to convince Mael to send their mother home. He would have interfered otherwise, and that conflicts with the goal of the game, so he needed to die. For someone introduced and treated as the main character for the first third of the game, it's shocking to learn that he was just some guy, no one important. People will disagree with me and say he helped raise Mael, yada yada yada, but the fact that he dies and the consequences of that death are irrelevant is what frustrates me. If he died serving the expedition, helping to secure the future of the world, then it's a noble death. But if none of the expeditions mean anything because the world is fake, then who cares? That's the problem with the sudden reframing of this story around a handful of family members. Characters who you thought mattered become just tag-alongs. The game was never about the expedition. Lune, Ciel, Minoko, they're no longer at the heart of the story. We're not a ragtag group of heroes trying to save our home. We're not coming back as champions with people sharing our story for centuries to come. We're just little army men figurines in a child's bedroom. I know people are gonna say I didn't get the story since I'm leaving out a lot of details, but it's for the sake of brevity. I don't want to waste your time with a story synopsis because that's what the wiki's for. And for what it's worth, I think the real world story is interesting. It's very touching seeing how each family member copes with loss. My problem isn't that this is what Expedition 33 is about. My problem is that this is what the story became. I'm not spending an entire game in the real world, learning about these real characters. I'm spending an entire game learning about the painting's inhabitants. To have them thrown away for a storyline introduced in the final act means neither story arc feels satisfying. Expedition 33 is an all-too-faithful homage to JRPGs in that it saves the bulk of its explanations for the tail end. 90% of the relevant plot details are divulged in a series of cutscenes at the end of Act 2, some optional quests in Act 3, and the ending. The rest of the game is essentially a glorified prologue. So here's where I'm at. Expedition 33 is an average turn-based RPG that's attracting a wider crowd because of the realistic character designs, great voice work, and interesting premise. Western audiences tend to appreciate these non-gameplay aspects more than the Japanese crowd, which is why this game is performing so well. I have no doubt that a fair chunk of people praising this game haven't played many turn-based games, and the presentation was what caught their eye here. Looking past these surface-level elements, the combat is imbalanced, and the exploration doesn't feel rewarding. Couple that with my grievances with the endgame plot twist, and I'm left with something that made for a decent distraction, but little else. This isn't meant to be an inflammatory video. I have no problem with people loving Expedition 33. You like what you like, and there's nothing wrong with that. Do I think it's hyperbolic to deem this the best game you've ever played when it's only been a few weeks? Yeah, a bit. At least wait a few months before making such a bold claim. I wish we didn't deal in extremes all the time, and this is something I'm guilty of as well. I don't love Expedition 33, and I don't hate it. I'm standing in the middle of the road, but that's a boring opinion to have. People aren't interested in fence-sitters. They want definitive good or bad, yes or no. That's what leads to wild claims like Expedition 33 is one of the best games I've played in my life. Time will reveal if these claims hold water, and I'm betting on some leaks. I've played countless turn-based games, including the ones that inspired Expedition 33, like Final Fantasy X and Lost Odyssey, and I found those games to be much more enthralling, and I can confidently make that claim because they didn't come out 3 weeks ago. I've been playing them for a very long time. There are short stories in Lost Odyssey called 1,000 Years of Dreams, and without exception, they are the best written pieces of work I've ever seen in an RPG. And do you know why that is? It's because a published author penned those stories. Most video game writers couldn't write a competent novel to save their lives. So even if we're going by the storytelling metric, Lost Odyssey has this game beat. In terms of combat, the Romancing Saga 2 remake released last year, and it has more engaging battles from start to finish with builds that matter, player choice that feels relevant the entire time. Loath as I am to admit that because I generally dislike remakes, but there it is. In terms of art direction, Fantasian saw a widespread release last December, and its beautiful handcrafted diorama environments left a much stronger impression on me than Expedition 33's admittedly great looking scenery. This is still an Unreal Engine 5 game, and it shows. Those purchased stock assets can't compare to environments literally created in real life. Plus, Fantasian's devs understood the benefits of including random battles and wide open fields, and they handled them with a modern twist. I'm bringing these games up to show that the turn-based genre is nowhere close to dead. A game like Expedition 33 is not the shot in the arm the genre needed, as you might have been led to believe. It's a competent game made by passionate devs, so I appreciate its existence, but this cascading torrent of hype it's received is far overblown by people that never bothered to widen their view. It's pretty telling that a fair chunk of praise for Expedition 33 revolves around the size of the dev team, the circumstances behind the studio's inception, and its pricing. None of this is gameplay. If one man made Expedition 33 in a weekend, or if 6,000 people took 200 years to make it, if the end result in both situations is the exact same game, why would I have a more enjoyable experience playing one version over another? Would I have more fun on a moment-to-moment basis knowing the game was made by one guy? Does that make the gameplay and story better? Maybe for you, somehow, it does. For me, it doesn't. In an alternate universe, we're getting games like Expedition 33 every month, and we're all content with the state of the industry. But in this universe, we praise Expedition 33 as a landmark moment in the mid-budget scene. That doesn't mean Expedition 33 is an incredible achievement. That means almost everything else is so terrible that a decent game can swoop in and remind people what it feels like to play something made with love. It's just too bad that people will forget all about this in a few weeks, when Elden Ring Night Rain drops, and we sink back into the sludge.